They thought they were dealing with someone ordinary, predictable, controllable, easy to corner. But then you walked in, and the room shifted. See, they've never met anyone like you. You don't beg for approval. You don't chase validation. And that scares people who survive on hierarchy and fear. So jealousy whispered, alliances formed, and suddenly you became the target. Funny thing is, when a jealous group tries to take you down, they don't expose you, they expose themselves. They never aim at what's average. Nobody gathers energy, whispers behind doors, or sharpens smiles for something ordinary. Ordinary doesn't threaten the order. Ordinary doesn't bend the room when it enters. You were targeted because you disrupted something they were comfortable hiding behind. Your presence alone questioned their hierarchy, their roles, their unspoken agreements. You didn't announce power, you didn't demand attention, yet it followed you anyway, and that's what unsettled them. You see, truly ordinary people blend in. They survive by fitting the mold, repeating the same opinions, wearing borrowed confidence. But you didn't come with a script they recognized. You moved differently, thought differently, stayed calm where panic was expected, silent where noise was demanded. That kind of unpredictability makes insecure minds spiral. They couldn't read you, couldn't categorize you, couldn't decide whether to admire you or eliminate you. So they chose the safer option for cowards: target first, understand later. They watched you longer than you realized, studied your reactions, counted your pauses, tried to find cracks that weren't there. And the more they looked, the more uncomfortable they became, because your strength wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It didn't beg to be seen. That's the worst kind for people who rely on dominance games, because they can't challenge what doesn't play by the rules. You weren't competing, yet you were winning without trying, and nothing enrages fragile egos more than effortless superiority. That's when the narrative started forming. Not facts, stories. Stories stitched together by jealousy and fear. They needed a reason to justify their discomfort, so they painted you as a threat, a problem, a disruption. Not because you did something wrong, but because your existence highlighted what they lacked. Confidence without arrogance. Control without cruelty. Presence without permission. You became the mirror they didn't want to look into. And here's the part they never understand, until it's too late. Targeting someone like you isn't strategy, it's confession. It admits they feel smaller. It admits they know you don't belong beneath them. They attack in groups because one-on-one would expose the imbalance immediately. Alone, they'd crumble. Together, they feel brave enough to whisper lies and call it unity. But unity built on insecurity always fractures under pressure. You didn't rise by pushing others down, and that confused them. You didn't need their approval, and that terrified them. You didn't react the way they rehearsed in their heads, and that drove them mad. Every calm response rewrote their expectations. Every refusal to engage made them louder. Every step forward you took without acknowledgement made their private panic public. They mistook your silence for weakness, your patience for submission, your restraint for fear. They assumed you'd fold, apologize, shrink. That's what ordinary targets do. But you were never ordinary. You were observant, calculated, grounded. You let them reveal themselves while you stayed exactly who you were. And without realizing it, they handed you leverage, because nothing dismantles a false hierarchy faster than showing who panics when control slips. They didn't choose you by accident. They chose you because deep down, they sensed what you hadn't even fully acknowledged yet. You were ahead of them, not just in position, but in mindset. And once people realize they can't reach you, they try to pull you down. That's not an insult. It's evidence. Evidence that you were never meant to blend in, never meant to stay quiet, never meant to be small enough to ignore. Jealousy never walks alone. It doesn't have the spine for that. On its own, it feels weak, exposed, embarrassed by its own existence. So it looks for company. It gathers nods, half agreements, shared glances. It builds courage by multiplying itself. That's how you know it's jealousy and not strength. Strength doesn't need witnesses. Jealousy needs an audience to survive. One insecure mind can doubt itself. A group of insecure minds can convince themselves they're right. They echo each other until the lie sounds like truth, until the discomfort feels justified. That's why it always turns into a circle, a clique, a quiet alliance. Not because you're dangerous in action, but because you're dangerous in comparison. Each of them alone might admire you. Together they resent you. They talk about you when you're not there, not to understand you, but to reassure each other. Every sentence is a coping mechanism. Every criticism is self-soothing. They dissect your moves, your silence, your progress, because doing nothing would force them to look inward. And that's the one place they refuse to go. So jealousy recruits, builds consensus, spreads like a rumor pretending to be concern. What makes it darker is how polite it looks from the outside. Smiles, agreement, shared laughter. But underneath, it's panic management. Someone noticed you standing out, and instead of rising to your level, they decided to lower you in theory first. That's easier. That's safer. A group can rewrite reality together, convince themselves that your confidence is arrogance, your restraint is manipulation, your success is luck. And once jealousy becomes collective, it feels justified enough to act. That's when targeting begins. Not directly, of course. Indirect shots, subtle exclusions, strategic misunderstandings. Because groups don't attack head on when they know they might lose. They chip away. They distort. They plant doubt in places you're not even watching. All while telling themselves it's fair, necessary, even noble. What they don't realize is that moving in a group exposes their weakness more than any failure ever could. If you really were insignificant, they wouldn't need numbers. If you truly didn't matter, they wouldn't coordinate. The very fact that they huddle proves you stand alone just fine. One person made them reorganize emotionally. One presence disrupted their balance. That kind of impact doesn't come from noise, it comes from substance. Jealousy in groups feeds on reinforcement. Each member needs the others to keep believing the story. Take one away and doubt creeps in. That's why they stick close. That's why they repeat themselves. That's why they escalate. Because deep down, they're afraid the illusion will crack, and someone will finally admit what they all know but won't say out loud. They envy your independence the most. You don't need backup to be yourself. You don't need permission to exist fully. You don't need approval meetings to validate your direction. And that kind of self-contained power is unbearable to people who only feel real when reflected in others. So they group up, not to defeat you, but to protect themselves from the truth you represent. Jealousy never moves alone, because alone it has to face itself. And that's a battle it already knows it would lose. They thought the plan made them look smart, strategic, calculated, like chess players moving pieces in the dark. What they didn't understand is that every move they made pulled the curtain back a little more. You didn't have to say a word. You didn't have to defend yourself. Their behavior did all the talking. That's the funny thing about schemes built on insecurity. Eventually, they start narrating the truth out loud. At first, it was subtle. Small actions disguised as coincidence. A shift in tone, a change in access, Tiny obstacles placed in your path to see if you'd flinch. They were testing you, measuring how much pressure it would take to bend you. And when you didn't react the way they expected, the pressure increased, not because the plan was working, but because panic had entered the room. Competent people don't rush. Secure people don't over-explain. But fear overproduces. It creates unnecessary steps, messy coordination, sloppy contradictions. One person says one thing, another says the opposite. Stories don't line up. Timelines wobble. Motives leak through sarcasm and defensiveness. They started needing proof, excuses, validations. Because deep down they knew the foundation was weak. Every accusation they aimed at you described them more accurately than it ever described you. Manipulative, threatening, untrustworthy. Those words didn't come from observation, they came from projection. They were telling on themselves without realizing it. You watched them scramble to justify choices that never needed justification if they were clean. Calm people don't gather evidence. Innocent people don't rehearse explanations. And the more they tried to control the narrative, the more chaotic it became. Too many voices trying to sound like one. Too many justifications layered on top of each other. They mistook volume for authority, repetition for truth. But control requires precision, and panic destroys precision. That's why cracks started appearing in places they couldn't hide. A reaction too sharp. A response too quick. A defensiveness that arrived before any real question was even asked. You became the still point in the middle of their noise. Not frozen, composed. Not passive, aware. You didn't chase clarity because you already had it. You didn't rush to correct lies, because lies collapse faster when they're left to stand on their own. Watching them scramble only confirmed what you already knew. This wasn't about justice, or fairness, or accountability. This was about fear of losing control over someone they never fully owned. They needed witnesses because they didn't trust themselves. They needed paperwork because they didn't trust their story. They needed consensus because they didn't trust their judgment. Every layer of evidence was really armor, poorly fitted, heavy, uncomfortable. An armor worn out of fear restricts movement. It slows reaction time. It makes every step louder than the last. What they never anticipated was how clearly desperation shows to anyone who's paying attention. Calm recognizes chaos instantly. Confidence spots insecurity without effort. While they were busy manufacturing a case, you were observing patterns. Who spoke first? Who echoed? Who hesitated? Who avoided eye contact? Their plan required constant maintenance, while your position required nothing at all. They thought pressure would make you crack. Instead, it made them careless. It made them reveal alliances that weren't supposed to be visible. It exposed priorities they claimed not to have. It showed exactly who felt threatened, who felt replaceable, who felt the ground shifting beneath their feet. You didn't expose them. They overperformed themselves into transparency. In trying to frame you, they framed their own motives. In trying to corner you, they trapped themselves in inconsistencies. In trying to control the outcome, they surrendered credibility. That's what happens when fear leads strategy. It mistakes motion for progress, aggression for power, reaction for intelligence. And the moment they realized they needed proof wasn't the moment you were in trouble. It was the moment they knew they already were. They never come alone when they think you're beneath them. Numbers give them courage. Numbers let them believe the imbalance is gone. It's easier to feel powerful when you're surrounded, when voices stack on top of each other, when responsibility dissolves into the crowd. One person acting alone has to face consequence. A group convinces itself the consequence belongs to no one. When they move together, it's not confidence, it's compensation. Real power doesn't need backup singers. It doesn't rehearse agreement. It doesn't check the room before speaking. But insecurity does. Insecurity needs confirmation at every step, a nod, a glance, a shared reaction. That's why they attack collectively. Alone, they'd hesitate. Together, they feel tall enough to reach for someone standing above them. They mistake volume for dominance. The more voices they add, the more they believe the weight shifts. But weight without direction is just noise. You didn't need to match their energy because you weren't operating on the same frequency. While they were busy aligning stories and sensing outrage, you stayed centered. You didn't rush to defend. You didn't scramble to explain. You didn't lower yourself into the chaos where they felt most comfortable. Groups rely on momentum. Once it starts, it has to keep moving or it collapses. That's why they escalate. That's why the attacks grow sharper, more public, more desperate. Stopping would mean reflection, and reflection would mean admitting they misjudged you. So they keep pushing, not because it's working, but because they're afraid of what silence would reveal. What they didn't account for is how exposed a group becomes when facing someone grounded. Every overreaction becomes visible. Every contradiction gets amplified. Someone hesitates. Someone overcommits. Someone starts protecting themselves instead of the group. Unity fractures the moment self-preservation kicks in, and it always does. Crowds are loyal only until pressure turns personal. They thought surrounding you would make you smaller. Instead, it outlined you. One figure standing steady against many moving parts draws attention without trying. Your stillness became contrast. Their coordination became choreography of fear. The more they tried to overwhelm you, the clearer it became who actually held control of themselves. You didn't have to dominate them. You simply refused to be dominated, and that refusal rattles people who rely on intimidation as currency. They're used to others shrinking, apologizing, over-explaining. When that doesn't happen, the script breaks. The group starts questioning its own effectiveness. Someone wonders if this was a mistake. Someone feels exposed. Someone starts looking for an exit. They assumed strength was something you prove loudly. They assumed leadership was something you claim. They assumed dominance required force. But real dominance is composure under pressure. It's restraint when provoked. It's clarity when chaos is offered as bait. You didn't overpower them. You outlasted their ability to maintain the illusion. Groups fall apart the moment they realize they can't control the outcome. Fingers start pointing. Blame shifts. Narratives change. The same voices that shouted together begin whispering separately. Loyalty dissolves into self-interest. And the person they tried to corner becomes the reference point they can't escape. Because everything that went wrong started when they underestimated you. They attacked together because they knew one-on-one would expose the truth immediately. One-on-one, there's no echo to hide behind. No shield of agreement, no borrowed courage. Just presence versus presence. And they knew, even before it began, that presence was never evenly matched.